was Chicago. And there, the struggle between the toilers and their bosses became intense and brutal. A meeting of the striking employees of the McCormick Harvester Company in that city was attacked by police. Men and women were beaten and several persons killed. To protest against the outrage, a mass meeting was called in Haymarket Square on May 4th.
Now, that Haymarket meeting was not called for the purpose of committing violence and crime, no. But that Haymarket meeting was called for the purpose of protesting against the crimes and outrages committed by the police on the day previous out at McCormick's.
It was addressed by August Spies, Adolph Fischer, and others, and was quiet and orderly. This was attested to by Carter Harrison, mayor of Chicago, who had attended the meeting to see what was going on. The mayor left, satisfied that everything was all right, and he informed the captain of the district to that effect.
Well, I got to the Haymarket about 8:15 o'clock, and I stayed there until Parsons interrupted Fielden's speech. Parsons stepped up to the stand and said that it looked like it was going to rain, and that the assembly had better adjourn to Zepp's Hall.
It was getting cloudy. The light rain began to fall, and the people started to disperse, only a few remaining while one of the last speakers was addressing the audience. Then, Captain Ward, accompanied by a strong force of police, suddenly appeared on the square. He ordered the men to disperse forthwith. "This is an orderly assembly," the chairman replied. Whereupon the police fell upon the people, clubbing them unmercifully.
At that moment, a friend of mine who testified on the witness stand went with me to Zepp's Hall, and we sat down at a table and had a glass of beer. At the moment we were going to sit down, my friend Parsons came in with some other persons, and after we had been sitting there about 5 minutes, the explosion occurred.
Then something flashed through the air and exploded, killing a number of police and wounding a score of others.
I had no idea that anything of the sort would happen because, as the state's witnesses themselves have testified, there was no agreement to defend ourselves that night. It was just a meeting called to protest.
It was never ascertained who the actual culprit was, and the authorities apparently spent little effort to discover him. Instead, orders were immediately issued for the arrest of all the speakers at the Haymarket meeting and other prominent anarchists.
As I have said before, the verdict, which was rendered by the jury in this room, is not directed against murder, but against anarchy.
The entire press and bourgeoisie of Chicago, and of the whole country, began shouting for the blood of the prisoners. A veritable campaign of terror was carried on by the police, who were given moral and financial encouragement by a citizens' association to further their murderous plot to get the anarchists out of the way.
I feel that I am sentenced, or that I will be sentenced to death because of being an anarchist and not because I am a murderer.
The public mind was so inflamed by the atrocious stories circulated by the press that a fair trial for them became an impossibility.
I have never committed a crime in my life. I am not a murderer. But I know a certain man who is on his way to becoming a murderer, an assassin. And that man is Grinnell, the state's attorney Grinnell, because he brought forth men on the witness stand that he knew would swear falsely, and I publicly denounced Mr. Grinnell as being a murderer and an assassin if I should be executed.
The trial became the worst frame-up in the history of the United States.
But if the ruling class thinks that by hanging us, by hanging a few anarchists, they can crush out anarchy, they will be badly mistaken, because the anarchist loves his principles more than his life.
The jury was picked for conviction. The district attorney announced in open court that it was not only the arrested men who were accused, but that anarchy was on trial and it was to be exterminated.
Anarchist is always ready to die for his principles, but in this case, I have been charged with murder, and I am not a murderer. You will find it impossible to kill a principle, although you may take the lives of men who confess these principles. The more that believers in just causes are persecuted, the quicker will their ideas be realized.
The judge repeatedly denounced the prisoners from the bench, influencing the jury against them. The witnesses were terrorized or bribed, with the result that 8 men, innocent of the crime and in no way connected to it, were convicted.
By rendering such an unjust and barbarous verdict that 12 honorable men of the jury box have done more for the furtherance of anarchy than the accused could have accomplished in a generation.
The incited state of the public mind and the general prejudice against anarchists, coupled with the employer's bitter opposition to the 8-hour movement, constituted the atmosphere that favored the judicial murder of the Chicago anarchists.
This verdict, which will be a death blow against free speech, free press, and free thought in this country, and the people will be conscious of it too. That is all I care to say.